I would love to hear the money guys talk about starting a business and what the boil point is to set up an official LLC, and give some similar advice, foo advice for business financials, etc. So is there anything about starting a business that changes the foo, and then what is that boiling point to when you're like setting up an LLC and really an official business? What do you think?
Well, let me give you the appropriate compliance disclaimer here. We can't offer any sort of legal advice, so we can't speak to you about when it makes sense or doesn't make sense to have some sort of entity formation, or even what type of entity you should establish, because you mentioned setting up an LLC, but in some places, subchapter S corporation might make sense, or in some places it might make sense to just remain a sole proprietor. Here's what's really difficult about a question like this, Robert, is that every single business is kind of unique. And it's unique in terms of how it operates and the underpinnings of it and what's required and what the boiling point in that business is for that business to thrive. But there are some common threads. There are some commonalities across what we see to be successful business startups that turn into legitimate businesses, that turn into ongoing businesses. And I think we can probably speak to some of those commonalities. One of which is, whenever we see someone start a business, think about starting a business, in our opinion, cash is king. It is your friend in terms of making sure that you've saved up enough operating capital to allow you to be able to sustain the business. Meaning, if all of a sudden I think it was Jerry Maguire, and I mean, it's been so many years since in the movie, but like, he walked in and he just like had his epiphany and he quit on the spot and then went on his own, right? Like, Jerry, he did not quite plan the way that I would suggest you might want to plan for starting your own job. You might want to put some time to actually prepare what this is going to look like and begin to save up capital so that you have a cushion in case things don't go the exact way that you thought they would. Because you want to make sure not only do you have an appropriate emergency reserve to cover your standard living expenses over the course of 3 to 6 months, but you even have capital to carry you just in case the business itself takes longer to get off the ground than you thought it would.
Yeah, I mean, Bo, you make a great point. I mean, I've walked this journey, and I always think about the visual I have in my head is if you don't know how far the diamonds are in the ground. And what if you dug 9 feet into the ground and the diamonds were 10 feet in the ground, but you didn't have enough cash to where you could go that one extra foot. You did 90% of the work and yet you were at the success point, but you just didn't have enough resources or capital to make it there. And I think that's what gets a lot of businesses. So that's why I always say, put on your 3D glasses. That's the down-to-earth plan, what you think will really happen. Write that business plan out, get the spreadsheet out, and actually do the work. There's, of course, the dream plan. This is where you're like, well, how fancy of a car am I going to be driving after this thing is rocking and rolling? And then there's the do-do plan. This is like, if this thing goes bad, how am I going to recover and get my family back on track because I made this knuckleheaded decision? So without a doubt, do the 3D glasses plan. We talk about that with a lot of things. And then I wrote down a whole list here. The first thing I see people do when they're considering do this, make sure you set up boundaries and separate accounts. The government's going to expect it. So go set up and it doesn't have to be an entity account. You can just go set up a bank account that you're going to go do anything with this account other than business transactions. It can be the same thing. You go set up a separate credit card that is only for business transactions. At some point, we might turn this into where it's actually got the tax ID and all the other things that goes with the structure stuff. But go ahead and start creating the separation, because that's going to help you from an accounting standpoint. That's going to help you from a liability standpoint. It's going to help you from a structure standpoint. So make sure you go ahead and start living that separate life with these assets, because you don't want a bunch of commingling. I see so many small business owners that are running ragged businesses. They don't respect it. They don't treat it right, and it's setting them up for a lot of mistakes for the future. Maybe me coming from an accounting background, that's just a pet peeve of mine. Also, then you're going to get into minimizing liability, and this is where the structure stuff comes in. And that's why the threshold might be very low. If you're doing something that has risk, and that doesn't have to mean like necessarily you falling off a ladder. It might mean risk of you're doing transactions, you're giving advice, you're doing something that somebody could sue you for because there's high value to whatever you're giving advice or thoughts on. And that's where typically you start getting in the structure of like LLCs,
Sure.
S corps, and I will tell you that Bo said it in a quick statement, but I'll tell you that states are different. I mean, we come from the state of Georgia originally, where everybody loves them some subchapter S. I mean, you typically go like single member LLC, and then once your business starts cranking, you turn into a subchapter S, and you pay yourself for what you're working in the business, but then you take the dividends or distributions out for being the owner of the business. So you do it in that legal structure. You move to Tennessee, and you realize they don't really like subchapter S's because they charge you a FA&E, which is a franchise tax, or what is it?
Franchise and excise tax.
Excise tax. That's the other part of it. So they charge you these things, so you don't see many subchapter S here. So you do need to do your research, figure out what is kind of accepted or reasonable in your state. You probably have to go talk to an attorney, and it's not that expensive because you want to definitely measure twice, cut once on getting your structure right. And then once you start having success, you might even need to go talk to that attorney or accountant again, because your structure might need to evolve with your additional success. And then I put on here accounting systems. You guys know when we did our collab with Caleb Hammer, I picked on him pretty hard. And a lot of you guys, what's wrong with using a spreadsheet? And maybe this is coming from an accounting background. I'm just telling you from rolling the business forward, because this is when you set up a business, it's perpetual, and you're going to have to file annual tax returns. You're going to have to reconcile bank statements. You're going to have to really, because let me go ahead and save you the heartache. When you start out, you're not going to be super busy from an accounting standpoint, and keeping up with it will seem very simple. But success, like everything I've talked about on the show, comes at you fast and creates a lot of complexity. So the better you can set yourself up while you're simple, the better you'll be able to grow and scale as you get complicated. And an accounting system is the backbone of all of that, because you're going to add in, you start off with just a checking account for your business, and then eventually you go add a credit card statement, and then eventually you go have employees that you go give them credit cards, and they're going to all come into one account, and it just starts getting to be a mess. And then you got loans, you got retirement accounts, you've got funding, you've got obligations, all that stuff. If you can set up an accounting system to start tracking that, even while it's a simple business, it gets much, much easier as it gets complex. And that's why I do like those type of systems, and they've gotten easier. I mean, I saw QuickBooks is even adding an artificial intelligence function, and I get nothing for sharing this. It's not like Intuit is a sponsor of the show at this point. But it is one of those things where, like, I love that I connect all of my accounts directly to my software, and I can be at home and in between a commercial break on a TV show and just sync up the accounts, go through the transactions. It can be that simple, but you just have to begin with the end in mind. So start simple, but go through these things and find somebody. Both Bo and I are part of you'd call mastermind or groups where we get around other business owners, because it is kind of a unique thing, and it's in a journey that you go on when you start a company and you're trying to figure out how to navigate this stuff.
The only other thing that I was going to throw out here is when it comes to starting a small business, don't major in the minors. I've got a bunch of like knuckleheaded buddies, and they just come up with the ideas all day. Oh, this is, and the first thing they immediately start doing is start working on logos and branding and thinking about the website and figuring. I'm like, guys, you don't have a business yet. Make sure that you actually have like a thing. Like, don't focus so much on the idea of having a business that you don't actually have something that another human being is going to be willing to pay for. Don't get lost spending all your time spinning up the website and thinking about the marketing and doing the brochure and doing all this stuff if you don't actually have the minimum viable product to prove that this business will actually work. I feel like so many people get lost in that. They end up spending a lot of money, spinning their wheels, and turns out, this was nothing more than a quick little hobby that was a flash in the pan.
And then I'll add on, because I remember I was in one of my mastermind groups, and once a company starts doing well, meaning it cash flows consistently, I'm always amazed at how many entrepreneurs, because they've taken this risk and it starts working, they're trying to figure out how they go and do the next thing, or real estate or whatever. And I'm always like, guys, you took a risk, a big risk, because a lot of small businesses come out in failure. As soon as one starts taking hold for you, don't skip actually doing the financial order of operations. I always tell people you've got to make wealth, And then to get to the where you can maintain or do all these crazy get rich behaviors that you hear people doing where they're using leverage, real estate, and all these other things. I'm like, you need to get a foundation underneath you so you don't make crazy desperate decisions because you hit a lick. And I saw a saying, don't assume you'll get rich twice. I mean, that is something that I want everybody who, if you hit a lick, don't assume you'll get rich twice, because I think a lot of people don't realize that lightning in a bottle. I get sentimental about memories that are lightning in a bottle. I get sentimental about business ideas that we've gone on journeys with, that you're like, man, that was lightning in a bottle, and I can't believe that this all worked out.